How's it going, everybody? In a couple previous videos I've put out, there have been some commentary regarding approach to the exams and stuff like that. And I talked about how I would approach the new CCNPs and stuff like that. And being an instructor, I'm in multiple communities and I see people commenting all the time how they took an exam and they saw a bunch of topics they had never encountered before, or they had got like a bunch of questions that they didn't know how to answer, and so they need to keep progressing forward on their coverage of technologies and stuff like that. And I usually don't make a whole lot of comments unless somebody's asking for something specific, because I don't really focus on the I don't really focus at the lower level certifications. I don't focus at CCNA. And so my approach to exams and studying for exams is probably the polar opposite of what most people do. And what I mean by that is most people that are studying for a CCNA or a CCNP, they look at the blueprint, for example, like I have my CCNA right here, and they look at the high details, and they see six different sections, and they look at that like, okay, let's expose this. And then they start Googling these things, or they look for an official certification guide, or they look for a book or some training geared to these technology terms and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that approach. It's how I did it for years. The first probably 3-4 years I was studying, getting my CCNA and my CCNP under my belt. But then when I started focusing on the CCIE, that changed my approach to how I had to tackle certification exams, because when you go from an NA to an NP, it's network professional, network associate, right? Well, when you transition to internetwork expert, not only do you have to know the stuff from the CCNA and CCNP and be good in those areas, like really good in those areas, you have to be able to take any one of the technologies that's on those tracks or at those levels, whether it's switching, routing, or what have you. You have to be able to interweave those technologies together to make them work and do it to where there's no problems. And it takes a long time to get one familiar with the technology well enough to where you don't run into problems, and second, how you can make OSPF and BGP work, and then add in something like NAT, and then VPNs, and then firewall capabilities, and you start compounding or adding features and capabilities, and eventually you get to a point where you've got 6, 7, 8 layers of stuff being tossed at a router, and you have to be able to very quickly and very efficiently be able to pick apart what's happening and be able to figure, okay, this is needed for this is needed for that, this works with that, this works with this, these 3 things enable this particular capability to work. So when I study for exams, I don't approach it looking at the blueprint. I don't. Not by looking for training that's specific to the exam. I don't look at the exam topics and follow them to the letter. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is, however, other related topics may also appear on any specific delivery of the exam. To better reflect the contents of the exam for clarity purposes, the guidelines may change at any time without notice. I will always highlight those 2 lines in any description I talk about in any particular exam. The reason why I do that is because there's a lot of folks out there that either haven't been through the things that I've been through, or they have a lot going on and they need to take the shortest, most direct path to that certification. And the way to do that is usually go online. They do some Google researching. They figure out, oh, well, this particular course seems to cover everything on the blueprint that's listed. I'm going to go after that. And they pay some money and they gain access, and next thing you know, they're off to the races. There's nothing wrong with that approach, right? For CCNA and CCNP, that approach will definitely work. However, you're setting yourself up for failure if that's the only approach that you take. So, what I mean by that is very straightforward. Whenever I take a look at this blueprint, and as soon as I start scrolling down to things like network access and IP connectivity, which I'm not sure why the hell Cisco decided to take those terms, because it's layer 2 and layer 3. Let's be real. Whenever I take a look at this, there's a lot of stuff that they're throwing at you. You know, for example, they're throwing root port, root bridge, and other port names. And they're talking about port states and port fast benefits. Yeah, they're covering spanning tree to a degree, but they're missing some things as well. So if you're going to go through some training that covers layer 2 technologies, that's fine. Go through the technology or go through the training that is being provided and take it as far as that particular author or instructor or content creator will take it. But don't let that be don't let the exam blueprint or some sort of instructor or some sort of author or content creator, don't let their coverage be your limitation. What I mean by that is actually very simple. Let me go ahead and show you a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and expand this. This is going to be to some switch configuration, and I'm also going to pull up some iOS configuration. So these are going to be configuration guides. Now the reason why I'm bringing them up is because this is the stuff that Cisco is going to be testing you on at these levels. There's some other stuff in here like how Cisco validated designs or CVDs are built and how you can take a look at, you know, spine leaf and how the data center environments are built in 2-tier architecture, the collapse core, 3-tier architecture, I should say, which is going to be your core, distribution, and access. So you're going to have to go and look these terms up and understand exactly how they all couple together, because if you don't do that, then you can get asked questions on those particular topics and you're not going to have a freaking clue how to answer them. You don't want to set yourself up for failure, right? You want to set yourself up for success. So the only way you're going to be able to do that is by looking at multiple areas of the blueprint and then Google it. You know, Googling is a great start, but it's not going to be the end all be all, right? There's going to be certain things that there's not going to be content specifically created for that particular thing. And you might have to go, you're obviously going to have to go watch YouTube videos, pay for content, go read a book, things like that. I read all the time. I'm constantly reading stuff. And guess what? Not everybody's a big fan of reading. Well, you know what? You're going to have to get out of your comfort zone and do things you don't want to do if you want to be successful in any industry you're in, right? So let's just cut to the chase and call for what it is. You got to stop being lazy and get after it. So the configuration guides are great because they're going to cover the technology. Now, the question you're probably going to have for me is, well, how far do I take it? My honest answer is whenever you're studying VLANs, read about everything. Read everything that's in this. When you're talking about spanning tree protocol and multiple spanning tree protocol, read all of this. When you're talking about how CDP works, read through all of CDP. When you're trying to understand how ether channels work and you want to know more about that, read all of it. So why spend the time? Well, would you rather not and have a problem in the exam where you're looking at it and you're going, I don't remember that being covered? Or would you rather go through and read up on this particular thing and go, oh, now I know what they're talking about? If you don't put the time and effort in, and how long would it take to read this? Let's just click on 802.1q and layer 2 protocol tunneling. Well, up here in the upper right hand corner, this slide bar is pretty long, right? But the majority of this is just giving you some background information as to what's going on. So for example, if you were to come through here and just read up what 802.1q tunneling is doing, that would help you have a better general understanding of what might be asked about. Now, is that specific to what you might need? Maybe, maybe not. You really have to come through here and read through what's actually, going on. So read through the documentation. If you don't read through the documentation, there might be specific commands or specific questions, and I'm talking from experience here, where I didn't read the documentation well enough, and then something happened in the exam, and I was just like, not sure what that is. And then you're trying to pick, you may have a general understanding of what the overarching technology is. Maybe it's something about BGP or, VLANs or something along those lines. But if you have no clue, then you just literally shot yourself in the foot. Don't shoot yourself in the foot, right? Captain Obvious moment. So things like that come into play. Go read through the documentation. Don't not spend the time going through the documentation. Same thing over here on this version of config. So on the new exam topics for IP connectivity, I was actually really disappointed in Cisco. I really am. They only cover basic layer 3 routing. They cover static routing and OSPF version 2 in a single area. I'm like, really? You don't even have EIGRP on the exam for CCNA, and it's your protocol? Like, what the hell, Cisco? So I would recommend that you read through, here's OSPF, click on OSPF, and you're like, oh my God, Rob, that's a ton. Sure is. Better start from the top. And would I recommend going through everything and knowing how to configure everything? No. What I would recommend is going through the beginning portion of things, like understanding what is OSPF, and go through and talk about the network types and the router types and the LSA types, and read through all this. Understand what's happening with all of this. And then once you've gone through with it, read through here and lab up as much as you can. Do I expect you to know everything? Nope, sure don't. But if you start reading through it and trying to understand what's happening, when you're going through training on something, you're going to be a little less clueless and a little bit more informed. And then what I would recommend doing is go through and just high level read some of these other topics, like what is OSPF version 3? And then you click on OSPF version 3, and you come down through here and you realize that OSPF version 3 is a routing protocol for IPv4 and IPv6. Why is there OSPF version 2 and why is there OSPF version 3? Well, the reason why there's OSPF version 2 is because OSPF version 2 only focuses on IPv4. OSPF version 3, a different version than OSPF version 2, was developed to support IPv4 and IPv6. So what will end up happening, and no, you cannot run OSPF version 2 on one router and OSPF version 3 on another. Not going to work. So you can go through and start reading up on all of these and understand what the LSA types are and stuff like that, and how everything works. Just go through it. Do you have to know all this? No. Just understand generally what OSPF version 3 is doing. Read through it. How long would this take you to read? Just read and generally understand? A week? Maybe 2 tops? Another topic on here that I would recommend you go through. Understand how NAT works. Where would I find NAT? You would find NAT on, let me go back to 15.6 real quick and show you where you would find that. So if you find the 15.6 configuration guide and you scroll down to, it would be under, I believe, IP addressing. Let me go and take a look real quick. I believe it's under here. And it is right there. So click on click on NAT, and then it brings you to this. And then you're like, oh my God, Rob, that's a ton of stuff. Well, if you simply look at the top option here, and then you just read through it. Again, I'm not asking you to go through here and be an expert on all of these topics. Now, I would be expected to go through and know how to do all this. You might say, well, why would you have to go that far? Well, having a CCIE puts a different level of expectation on you than having a CCNA or a CCNP. So I expected to know how this stuff works because it's part of the process. And one of the things that I'm doing currently is I have gone back to the basics, and I am going through and, how does this work? There's some things that I skipped over in my CCIE preparation. I'm not proud of it. I did what I had to do back then to get stuff done. But one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm going back through and I'm like, well, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And what is this? And how do these particular things work? And just by reading through the documentation and the configuration guides, I feel like I'm almost reliving my CCIE preparation. But that's a good thing because now I'm getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger rather than going, not really sure. I never want to have that feeling going into a written exam again and going, I haven't got a clue. I'm just not sure because I didn't spend enough time reading the documentation. I figured, I've covered that. I should be good. Not. But these are my experiences, and I'm trying to prevent you from going through the same oh crap moments that I went through. So, bottom line, read the documentation. Whatever level you're at, spend that much more time going through the blueprint and diving into those particular topics. I'm sure there's going to be some instructor or author that's going to put a concerted amount of effort into a particular a level of training for a particular level of certification, CCNA, CCNP, stuff like that. I've seen a lot of CCA level instructors that have cut a lot of corners, and I'm not going to name names or call anybody out, but I see a lot of instructors lately that are putting out just enough material to cover some of the blueprints. And they're basically going through like, oh, let's talk about this, let's talk about this, let's talk about that. And they're not really getting into the meat and potatoes. They're literally taking, for example, the OSPF guide here. They're going through OSPF. They're talking about, like, let's say there's 30 topics for OSPF. They're taking the 25 most common things that they're really familiar with and covering just those and not really going into any level of real detail. I am going back through and I'm going, okay, well, how does, and let me just read through this real quick. I was looking for, where is it? Fast reroute. I don't see it. Fast convergence. Stub router. I don't see LFA. It may not be here. It's down here a little bit further. I'm not seeing it. So that's it might be a different set of documentation, but translation, fast convergence, that's LSAs. Yeah, I don't see the command in here. They have LFA is not here. It may not be supported in this version of code, but basically there's a few specific versions or a few specific commands that are new, and I haven't really tested them. Where I've tested like OSPF OSPF v3, VRF, Lite, PE to CE, tested that. TTL security, not really. Prefix suppression for OSPF version 3, haven't really tested it. I know generally what it's doing, but I really haven't tested it. So my goal as someone that's been a CCIE for a while is, okay, what's new? What haven't I tested? So let's go play around with that technology. So what I'm recommending all of you do is spend some time and go understand the core fundamentals of whatever it is you're doing. Take the information directly out of the documentation, watch whatever videos, read whatever books you need to, but don't not use the documentation. The documentation is there for a reason. There will be questions on the exam that will be pulled literally they'll pluck the question, they'll word it, and it'll be plucked right out of the documentation, and you'll need to have read the documentation to learn that. So they might ask you some questions around that. Just be generally familiar with each one of the topics. Again, you don't have to go into extreme detail with it and test out every variation of it. Just be familiar with the idea. This way here, if they do ask you a question on, say for instance, link state database overload protection, what is that and how does it work? You click on link state database overload protection, and link state database overload protection keeps the router keeps count of the number of received non-self-generated LSAs it has received when so mechanism to limit the number of non-self-generated LSAs for a given OSPF process. Basically what you're trying to do is there is this upper limit to how many LSAs that a particular router can accept from other routers. And if you exceed that number, you can crash the process. So you're trying to prevent the database from getting overloaded by basically putting in a limit of saying, you know what, I'm not going to, and I'm not sure if it's actually in here, max LSAs is 12,000. So if you come in here and you say for 4,000, you're only going to learn a maximum of 4,000 LSAs, an LSA being a route of some type. So you can go through and limit the amount of LSAs. Here's 14,000 and so on and so forth. But it's basically a control plane protection mechanism. So kind of like control plane policing or control plane protection, but you're not protecting the CPU specifically. You're protecting the OSPF database from getting flooded or like a denial of service attack. Or if you send too many LSAs to the router, it'll just die. Well, you're trying to prevent that from happening. So like I said, I'm generally familiar with most of the things that are on here. I may not, how hard would that be to configure and test out? Take me a couple of minutes. I would have a general idea of how that would work. And here is some of the outputs that you can look at in order to determine what's going on. So there's that. And then just go through each one of them as you're going along. It really wouldn't take you that long to test these capabilities out to make sure that they work, or to test them out the way that they want, the way that they're meant to be used. And that's really what I'm trying to convey here, is don't be afraid to test out some of these capabilities. Some might be easier to test than others. Like for example, auto route exclude for version 2, auto route include. I believe this would be for MPLS traffic engineering tunnels. So this would be feature allows specific destinations or prefixes to avoid traffic engineering tunnels for packet transport. So this is used with MPLS traffic engineering tunnels, where you would say MPLS traffic engineering auto route exclude, and you would prevent a particular prefix from being able to be forwarded over an MPLS traffic engineering tunnel. But that's, unless you're in the service spreader world, you wouldn't really do anything. So it gives you that flexibility of preventing a route from being used as to be sent over an MPLS TE tunnel. So things like that come into play. So with that being said, that's what I really wanted to convey to everybody in this video. I'm over the 20-minute mark. I tried to go a little less than that, but so be it. But I hope what I'm trying to convey to you guys makes a lot of sense. So until next time, guys, thanks for stopping by, and until next time, take it easy.